Imagine living next to someone who plays with your emotions, twists reality, and manipulates everything around them with a frightening level of skill, all while wearing a smile on their face. Now, imagine there's a kind of psychological game this manipulator simply cannot win. In this video, we'll dive into the complex maze of the narcissist's mind and reveal the one strategy that completely disarms them, based on the deep teachings of Carl Jung. Get ready, because what you're about to discover will completely change how you see human relationships. Carl Jung, one of the greatest figures in analytical psychology, dedicated his life to uncovering the dark shadows of the psyche. It's precisely by diving into this shadowy world, where the ego hides behind countless masks, that we find the key to dismantling the most dangerous psychological game there is. In this video, we'll talk about the one game narcissists absolutely cannot stand, a direct confrontation with what they fear the most, self-knowledge and inner truth. When that truth starts to shine, the narcissist's mask begins to crack. Have you ever felt like you're trapped in an invisible web where your emotions are constantly manipulated? Ever felt that no matter how hard you try to please or explain yourself, it's never enough? That's no coincidence. Narcissists build alternate realities where they always win, until someone plays a different game. A game Jung understood better than anyone else. The game of individuation, of full self-awareness. It's a silent game, but one with incredible power. What narcissists fear most isn't rejection or exposure. It's the mirror. Not a mirror reflecting appearances, but the true mirror of the soul, reflecting motivations, traumas, and hidden shadows. When you stop reacting to their manipulations and begin seeing through them, something shifts. Their control starts to crumble. And here Jung teaches us, what you deny controls you, but what you accept transforms you. Consciousness is the most powerful weapon against psychological control. So, if you've ever been hurt, manipulated, or emotionally drained by someone like this video is for you. Because today, we'll reveal the one thing that makes a narcissist lose control and how you can reclaim your inner power. Stay with me until the end, because the truth may hurt, but it also frees. And it shows you that liberation has never been closer to truly understand the impact narcissism has on someone's life. You need to grasp how this personality operates quietly, eating away at the other person's identity from the inside out. Carl Jung warned that whatever remains unconscious returns as fate. When the narcissist acts on the unconscious of those around them, they become a sort of dark archetype, inducing guilt, constant doubt, and feelings of inadequacy. The psychological game starts without warning, with compliments, excessive attention, and a false sense of connection. Before you know it, you're emotionally dependent, constantly seeking approval, and avoiding conflict at all costs. The narcissist's seduction is strategic. They manipulate with sweetness, flatter with interest, and offer support with hidden intentions. Everything seems charming, until you start doubting your own feelings and your grasp on reality. Jung taught that the collective unconscious holds symbols and patterns that cross generations. The narcissist, consciously or not, taps into this symbolic field, positioning themselves as savior, master, or victim, archetypes that create deep emotional identification. Usually, by the time you sense something's off, you're already too emotionally involved to walk away unscathed. The trap closes when you try to argue, confront, or simply express a legitimate need. The narcissist plays the victim, flips the script, and often makes it all your fault. You're led to believe you're exaggerating, unstable, or lacking empathy. Jung saw this process as a projection of the shadow, the rejected, unconscious part of the psyche. By projecting their shadow onto others, narcissists force victims to carry feelings they refuse to own. That's when the real game begins, a game where the other person bears pain that isn't theirs. This process is so subtle that many victims don't even realize they're being emotionally manipulated. They blame themselves, thinking they need to improve, try harder, or be more understanding. This happens because narcissists are experts at distorting others' emotional boundaries. Jung said individuation, the process of becoming your true self, requires courage to face the shadow. Awakening begins only when the victim recognizes something is deeply wrong, even if they can't yet name it. What keeps the narcissist in control is the emotional predictability of the other person. Whenever you react the same way, with fear, guilt, or excuses, they win. But when you start acting unexpectedly, something begins to break. Jung said consciousness is disruptive, and here is the turning point. When you start observing instead of reacting, the game changes. It stops being fun for the narcissist because their most powerful weapon, the emotional predictability, starts failing. This change doesn't happen suddenly. It's an internal process. You have to go through the pain of realizing you were trapped, manipulated, and that many of your own actions were conditioned by that toxic bond. I call this the shadow confrontation. It's painful, yes, but also freeing. Because when you recognize the shadow, both yours and theirs, you start reclaiming your own story. And when the narcissist loses control, they fall apart internally. Once you stand your ground, without aggression, without explanations, but with firm resolve, the narcissist begins to emotionally unravel. They don't know how to handle someone who refuses to play their manipulation game. Carl Jung said inner freedom is born when we stop fearing the truth. And the truth, in this case, is that the narcissist needs your reaction to exist. They feed off your emotional responses. When you stop responding with pain or fear, they lose their source of energy. This is where true power begins to emerge, the power of conscious presence. The power to not explain yourself, not give in, and not engage in drama. This disarms the narcissist like nothing else. Jung understood consciousness as a tool of transformation, and here it shows itself as a defense weapon. Because when you are aware of what's happening, you no longer fall for emotional traps. The narcissist, unable to control this new version of you, starts to back away. Many ask, isn't it dangerous to confront a narcissist? The answer lies in how you confront them. It's not about yelling or attacking. It's about standing in your truth with calm and silence. Paradoxically, the most powerful response is emotional absence. Jung affirmed that the true enemy isn't outside us, but inside. And by mastering ourselves, we also master external influences. Narcissists can't handle this new stance. They need an audience, conflict, and drama. When that's gone, they face their greatest fear, emptiness. For Jung, this emptiness means lack of meaning and identity. Behind the arrogance, the narcissist is a lost soul, disconnected from the self. They created a false self, a persona that needs constant feeding. When that persona no longer gets recognition or validation from others, the narcissist faces an existential crisis. They find themselves without a mirror, without reflection, without validation. At this point, they either flee, attack, or try to seduce again, but the game no longer works the same way. Often, the narcissist tries a last-ditch effort called hovering, reappearing with fake remorse and empty promises. But now, with awakened consciousness, the victim sees clearly behind the mask. Jung would say this is the victory of the self over the shadow. When the false ego can no longer dominate the psychic field, consciousness shines through. With it comes clarity, peace, and true power of choice. This transformation isn't just personal. It affects all areas of life, relationships, work, and self-esteem. When you break free from a narcissistic cycle, you redefine your boundaries, identity, and dignity. Jung believed individuation is the process of becoming whole, which means recognizing what you allowed, but also celebrating the strength you gained by walking away, that there's no weakness in having fallen. There's courage in rising again. To wrap up this first part, It's essential to understand that the narcissist cannot stand someone who knows themselves, who watches themselves, and who doesn't react. That is the game they cannot win. And that's exactly the game you'll learn to play in the next sections. Because true emotional freedom starts when you understand what's behind the other person's behavior. And even more importantly, what's behind your own. Now that you've begun to grasp how consciousness impacts narcissism, the next step is to dive deeper into how this inner transformation happens and the practical steps that make the narcissist completely lose control of the game. This inner transformation that disarms the narcissist doesn't happen through explosive confrontations or endless arguments. It begins with silence, not just any silence, but the silence of awakened consciousness. Carl Jung always emphasized that the biggest battles are fought inside us, not outside. When a victim of a narcissist stops reacting emotionally and starts observing, they activate something the manipulator cannot control: lucidity. This lucidity becomes a powerful shield against psychological games. Narcissists expect screams, tears, and excuses. When all they find is calm serenity, they fall out of balance. But this serenity doesn't come from a superficial place. It is the result of a deep, painful inner process, awakening to the truth. Jung said no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by bringing darkness into awareness. It's here many people begin to realize how far they had strayed from themselves. Years spent living for others, trying to please, seeking validation, and avoiding rejection. Breaking this pattern feels like destruction, but it's also a rebirth. Breaking free requires practice. The first step is recognizing the emotional triggers the narcissist uses. They know exactly where to strike to provoke pain, guilt, or fear. When you identify these triggers, you start to see they're not absolute truths, they're internal programs. Jung called these complexes unconscious emotional cores that control us without us noticing. The narcissist skillfully accesses these complexes to manipulate your reactions. But when you recognize them, you start disarming them, one by one. This awareness brings a feeling of power. You realize you can choose not to react, not to play the game. This is one of the most powerful moments in the process. The narcissist begins losing influence. They test, provoke, accuse, and play victim, but your emotional neutrality completely destabilizes their game. Jung said self-knowledge is the beginning of all wisdom, and in this case, knowing yourself is more than a spiritual journey. It's an emotional survival strategy. When you stop responding to attacks with excuses or defenses, the narcissist loses all control. This creates a deep feeling of loss for them. That's when their behavior becomes even more desperate, escalating accusations, seeking allies, trying to socially isolate you. But if you stay firm in your consciousness and don't react, they weaken. Jung said what we resist persists, but what we accept transforms. Accepting narcissism's reality is the first step to no longer being controlled by it. Consciousness brings discernment. You begin to see the narcissist's words as empty repetitions and predictable strategies. Seduction gives way to blatant manipulation, and you see it clearly. This is a crucial turning point. Once you see the pattern, you're no longer a hostage to it. Jung compared this process to the hero's awakening in their journey, the moment they realize the battle isn't against others, but against their own illusions and fears. From here, a subtle shift happens. You begin prioritizing yourself, listening to yourself, and respecting yourself. Your actions are no longer shaped by fear of abandonment or criticism, but by the truth of who you are. This deeply irritates the narcissist, who senses they've lost their main source of control, the power over your behavior. Carl Jung spoke about the self as the center of the psyche's wholeness. When you connect with yourself, you become unmanageable, and the narcissist feels small, powerless, and often aggressive. At this stage, it's common for them to try to restart the initial cycle of charm, compliments, promises, fake vulnerability. This is called the idealization devaluation discard cycle, a recurring pattern in relationships with narcissists. But now you recognize the pattern and, more importantly, no longer feel tempted to return. Deep down, you understand it was all an illusion. Jung said illusion is the biggest obstacle to soul evolution, and breaking free from it is an act of spiritual courage. This courage transforms all your relationships. You start seeing similar patterns in others and different dynamics, and you begin setting healthy, clear, and firm boundaries. Boundaries become non-negotiable for those who want to live fully. Narcissists hate boundaries. They test, challenge, and try to cross them. But when you hold your ground calmly and without excuses, they understand you're no longer fertile ground for their game, and they back off. It's important to highlight that this transformation isn't linear. There will be setbacks, doubts, and moments of weakness. This is part of the process. Jung affirmed the psyche is made of opposites, and integrating these opposites makes us whole. So don't blame yourself if you stumble. The most important thing is to keep finding your way back to consciousness, returning to yourself faster and stronger each time until this new stance becomes natural. Over time, you'll realize you no longer need explanations to walk away. No longer have to convince anyone of your side. Inner peace speaks louder than any argument, and no matter how loud the narcissist gets, they can no longer hurt you. This is true power, not the power to control others, but the power to be emotionally unshakable. Jung called this shadow integration, knowing your darkness and still choosing the light. This choice reflects in every part of your life. You become more selective, truthful, and whole. Most importantly, you develop something a narcissist can never have: authenticity. Narcissists live off appearances, performances, and external validation. You now live from essence, and that's priceless. Carl Jung said the goal isn't perfection but wholeness. Wholeness means recognizing every part of yourself, even those that were manipulated, and still moving forward with dignity. Rebuilding your identity after a relationship with a narcissist is one of the most intense and transformative steps in self-discovery. After silence, after breaking the cycle of manipulation, a space opens inside, a void that needs to be refilled. Jung reminds us that the soul needs direction, not just liberation. It's exactly at this vulnerable moment that real healing begins. The pain once caused by others turns into a challenge to find yourself again. Many narcissistic abuse survivors, when freed, face a deep sense of loss, not just for the person who left, but for the identity shaped by that relationship. For a long time, their decisions, feelings, and even dreams were filtered through the lens of manipulation. Now free, they look in the mirror and don't recognize themselves. Jung said before becoming whole, one must shatter to consciously choose which parts to keep and which to transform. This process can feel scary, but it's incredibly freeing. For the first time in a long time, you don't have to walk on eggshells, edit your words, or erase yourself to avoid conflict. Freedom, however, comes with responsibility. Every choice is yours. Every step is yours. Jung said true inner freedom arises from acting aligned with yourself, and that reconnection becomes the new foundation of your life. To build this new identity, you must turn inward. The silence that once was the narcissist's weapon now becomes a sacred space for inner listening. It's in this silence you start hearing your intuition again, recognizing your values, and identifying what truly matters. Jung called this individuation, the process where a person differentiates from the collective, from the roles imposed on them. At this moment, you stop being what others expected you to be and start becoming who you really are. This rediscovery touches many emotional, spiritual, and psychological layers. You begin revisiting old choices and realize many weren't really yours. They were made from fear, scarcity, and the need for approval. Carl Jung teaches us that healing doesn't come from changing the past, but from understanding it. And by understanding what led you to the narcissist, you gain clarity to avoid repeating the pattern. Self-knowledge becomes your new compass. At this point in your journey, spirituality or a sense of purpose often emerges as a powerful force. You begin to ask not only who am I, but where am I going? Jung believed true healing is ultimately a reconnection with life's meaning. When you look back with compassion instead of blame, you begin to see suffering's role. It doesn't define you, it shows how much you can grow beyond it. One of the greatest dangers after leaving a narcissistic relationship is falling into a new cycle of self-sabotage. The mind, still conditioned by trauma, might repeat known patterns, not by choice but emotional habit. This is where internal vigilance becomes crucial. Jung spoke about autonomous complexes, unconscious contents that act like psychic entities with their own will. When unrecognized, they take control. That's why identifying repetitive patterns is so important. Breaking the cycle is essential. Over time, you start developing emotional discernment. You begin to recognize much more easily when someone is trying to manipulate you, when your emotions are being triggered on purpose. And most importantly, you learn to pause before reacting. That pause? It's pure gold. It's in that tiny space between stimulus and response where you take back control of your story. Carl Jung said consciousness is like light. When it shines, it dissolves the power of shadows. The more aware you become, the less vulnerable you are to manipulation. Rebuilding your identity is not a lonely journey. In fact, it invites you to surround yourself with authentic people who offer healthy, reciprocal connections. One of the deepest wounds left by a narcissist is emotional isolation. You were trained to trust only them, to doubt everyone else, to distance yourself from those who genuinely cared. Now, your challenge is to allow yourself to be seen again, to create new bonds, to build a support network grounded in truth, not control. During this stage, it's natural to feel nostalgic for what once was, and that's okay. Jung said no transformation happens without nostalgia. But what you're really missing isn't the other person, it's the version of yourself who believed you were loving and being loved. With time, you learn to separate illusion from reality, and that's not coldness, that's maturity. When you look back with awakened eyes, you realize the love you sought in others was always inside you. That love now guides your steps. Self-care becomes essential, not just caring for your body, but also your mind, emotions, and spirit. You learn to listen to yourself, honor your rhythms, and say no without guilt. Saying no turns into an act of self-love. Jung taught us trauma isn't what happens to us, but what we do with what happens. Now, you choose to transform your trauma into strength, wisdom, and purpose. Your self-esteem, once shattered, starts to rise again, first in small ways, a confident choice, a clear opinion, a firmly held boundary. Then in bigger decisions, changing your environment, cutting toxic ties, seeking new paths. Every small victory reinforces the new identity you're building. The narcissist, now outside your world, no longer has access to your inner life. The most fascinating part is that by rebuilding yourself, you naturally become inaccessible to new narcissists. They might try, but they can no longer penetrate your awareness. You see through them quickly, react less, and distance yourself early. Carl Jung said the unconscious only holds power as long as it's unrecognized. Now that you see it, everything changes. Clarity becomes your invisible armor, and lucidity your sword. At the end of this process, you don't just rebuild, you reinvent yourself. You become someone who walked through fire and chose not to burn but to illuminate. Your suffering isn't denied but given new meaning. It becomes wisdom, not pain. With each step forward, you prove to yourself you haven't gone back to the start. You're at a new level of awareness, opening a new cycle filled with more truth, strength, and light. Once your identity is reconstructed and you understand the inner workings behind manipulative patterns, the next step is to build a strong emotional shield. Jung teaches that individuation doesn't end with self-knowledge. It's solidified by maintaining awareness, even when unconscious temptations arise. Nothing tests this stability more than the narcissist's attempt to come back, or the appearance of new relationships repeating the same pattern. So now, let's dive into practical, profound strategies to stay shielded inside and out. The first step in emotional armor is cultivating what Jung called active attention. This means being fully present and observing yourself in real time, noticing thoughts, feelings, and impulses without automatically identifying with them. This allows you, whenever manipulation is attempted, to pause and reflect before reacting. This pause is one of your strongest weapons against a narcissist because it breaks the reactive cycle that feeds their control over you. Moreover, nurturing active attention helps you spot manipulative behaviors right from the start, excessive idealization, over-the-top compliments, emotional urgency. Suddenly, these things feel off, artificial. That feeling of strangeness? It's proof you're no longer under their spell. Jung said the unconscious speaks in symbols. When you learn to decode them, you begin to see what was invisible before. This symbolic reading becomes your new emotional language. Another crucial shield is constant self-questioning. Every time someone tries to destabilize you with subtle criticism, judgmental looks, or emotional manipulation, ask yourself, does this resonate with my inner truth? This simple question reconnects you to your center. Jung described the self as the balance point between conscious and unconscious. The more you access it, the less you depend on others' opinions. Surrounding yourself with conscious, emotionally mature people is key to protection against narcissists. Healthy relationships make manipulative, devaluing, or controlling behaviors easier to spot. Jung called this mirrored relationships. We see ourselves through others. If your mirrors are clear, your self-image will be too. Setting firm, clear boundaries is essential. Narcissists hate limits because they restrict their power to invade, dominate, and shape others to their will. When you say no with conviction, no explanations needed, you send a powerful message. I belong to myself. Jung said maturity means taking responsibility for your life, and part of that is protecting yourself emotionally without guilt or fear of displeasing others. A practical tool to reinforce these boundaries is conscious detachment. The ability to emotionally disconnect from people, situations, and expectations that don't align with your truth. This isn't coldness, it's clarity. Jung reminded us that the soul sickens when living in contradiction. Conscious detachment is an act of self-love and a choice for inner coherence. Self-care also becomes your fortress. When you nourish your body, mind, and spirit, you send constant signals that you value yourself. The narcissist senses this, and the more you value yourself, the less power they have to devalue you. Jung said the unconscious feels our actions more than our words. So taking care of yourself is also a way to communicate to the world and the narcissist that you're no longer available for their emotional games. Another vital shield is the practice of solitude. Not loneliness, but the joy of being with yourself. Narcissists create emotional dependency so you feel you can't be alone, that you need them to feel alive, loved, and seen. When you learn to be at peace with your own company, you break this illusory bond. Jung believed all healing begins in solitude because that's where the soul reorganizes itself. Reinforcing your self-image is another pillar in this process. After years of criticism, belittling, and devaluation, you need to reclaim your self-esteem through small but consistent achievements, personal projects, moments of overcoming challenges. Each accomplishment reaffirms your worth. Carl Jung said a person's value isn't in their image, but in their integrity. Integrity is born from the coherence between what you feel, think, and do. A highly effective practice is therapeutic journaling. Writing daily about your feelings, experiences, and thoughts helps organize your mind and reveals unconscious patterns still at work. When you write, you see yourself, and seeing yourself honestly gives you power. Jung considered symbolism essential to healing, and writing is a powerful way to transform internal chaos into clarity. Spirituality, regardless of religion, also plays a key role in shielding you. When you connect with something greater, life's meaning, a divine presence, your mission, it becomes harder to be manipulated by petty games. Narcissists operate in the ego realm, focused on appearance and the present moment. Spirituality lifts your gaze, expands your perception, and reminds you that you are far greater than what you have experienced. Jung said the soul longs for meaning, and when it finds it, it becomes unshakable. Emotional shielding doesn't mean becoming hard, cold, or indifferent. It simply means learning to protect your sacred space and honoring your peace above any urge to please or fit in. Narcissists don't understand this kind of strength. They fear it because it doesn't feed on approval but on truth. And truth, as Jung said, is always an inner process. When emotional setbacks happen, and they will, it's crucial to remember shielding isn't perfection but a daily commitment. Every day you renew your promise to your emotional integrity, lucidity, and dignity. That itself is a powerful shield. Jung said we are made to grow, and growth often means choosing the pain of awareness over the comfort of illusion. When the narcissist finally realizes they've lost control and their emotional games no longer work, something inside them begins to crumble. Jung explained that what isn't integrated into consciousness descends into the unconscious and returns as fate. The narcissist's fate when facing an awakened victim is collapse. This collapse can show up in many ways: rage, despair, contempt, denial, or desperate attempts to regain control. But above all, it carries a deep emptiness, the inability to feed their ego at someone else's expense. This collapse isn't just emotional, it's structural. The narcissist built their identity on the reflection others provided. They need to be admired, feared, or desired. When you stop playing the game and cease offering that reflection, they face an existential crisis. Jung called this the disintegration of the inflated ego, a painful process where the mask falls, revealing a fragmented soul without a center or axis. At this point, the narcissist will do anything to regain control. Their first reaction is often fury. Feeling exposed and unmasked, unable to face their inner truth, they project all their rage onto you. They start accusing, defaming, delegitimizing, and creating stories to destroy your image and regain power. Jung said what we deny in ourselves, we project onto others. The narcissist, confronted with their impotence, urgently needs a scapegoat. This is when many become psychologically cruel, not necessarily physically dangerous. If fury fails, seduction follows. They return with emotional speeches, nostalgic memories, and promises to change, trying to confuse your mind and rekindle the emotional bond. This comeback is a test. They want to see if they still have access to your inner world. But now, with your awareness awake, you see their manipulation clearly, and this unsettles them even more. Jung said consciousness is a living force, and here, it's your greatest defense. In total denial of the game, the narcissist may enter a third phase: apathy. They pretend not to care, act like you never mattered, that nothing changed. This distancing is an attempt to preserve the little that's left of their self-image. Admitting loss of control means admitting they're not as powerful as they believed. Jung would call this a confrontation with the shadow the moment the ego must face its own falseness. But since narcissists rarely accept this, they keep running from themselves. It's at this stage that many narcissists seek a new victim, someone who doesn't yet have clarity, who reacts, who lets themselves be drawn in. It's a way to keep the cycle alive, but unlike before, you now watch it all from outside, not with judgment but with understanding. You see the pattern repeating, and that frees you. Because, as Jung said, to understand is to transform. When you understand the game, you're no longer a piece on the board. Witnessing the narcissist's collapse can bring up mixed emotions: pity, anger, sadness, even compassion, and all of these are valid. But the most important thing to remember is, your job isn't to save them. Your job is to continue your own journey. A narcissist will only change if they choose, by their own will, to face their shadow. According to Jung, that demands brutal honesty with oneself. Until then, they will keep trying to control, manipulate, and project, but you are no longer available for that. This moment can also be dangerous for you because, after so much time in the emotional dance, there's a natural impulse to want to understand, help, or even confront them. But this impulse often traps you emotionally. Carl Jung warned us about the savior complex, the unconscious desire to heal others as a way to avoid facing our own wounds. So when you see the narcissist collapse, focus on yourself. Protect yourself. Keep your distance. Choose your peace. It's in this space of detachment that your true freedom takes root. You didn't just survive narcissism, you transcended it. This transcendence is visible. Your energy changes. Your gaze changes. Your choices change, and this bothers those who once knew you vulnerable, submissive, and diminished. They don't recognize this new version of you. But Jung said humans are born to evolve. And evolving often means leaving behind who you were and who others expected you to be. Over time, the narcissist disappears from your reality, not because they cease to exist, but because you stopped vibrating on the same frequency. It's like the universe no longer places you on the same playing field. You attract different people, relationships, and experiences, ones that are lighter, more authentic. and truer. And this isn't luck. It's the result of deep, courageous, honest inner work. Carl Jung said everything rejected inside us shows up outside as destiny. Now, your destiny is changed because you changed. If the narcissist reappears someday, they won't be a threat anymore. You might hear their words, but they won't reach you. You might see their gestures, but they won't affect you. You're shielded, not by coldness, but by clarity. And that clarity disarms them completely. They realize they lost you to yourself. And that loss is the hardest for them to bear. We've come to the end of an intense, deep, and above all, transformative journey. If you've stayed until now, it means you're already waking up. Maybe without even realizing it, you've started playing the one game the narcissist can't stand, the game of consciousness. You stopped reacting and started observing. You stopped blaming yourself and started knowing yourself. You stopped seeking validation from others and began recognizing it within. This is the true inner revolution. As Jung taught us, no external change is more powerful than the one born in the unconscious, illuminated by consciousness. Today you understood that the narcissist isn't defeated by confrontation, yelling, or proving them wrong. They crumble in front of your clarity. They lose power when you stop responding to their provocations. They collapse when you stand firm without attacking. They disappear when you no longer fall for illusions. And most importantly, they stop affecting you the moment you choose, every day, to live your truth above any need for approval. What once held you captive now sets you free, and that freedom is irreversible. Make no mistake, you are not weak for having been involved with a narcissist. You are human. What brought you here wasn't naivety, it was the universal search for love, connection, and validation that we all desire. But what takes you out is the courage to see yourself fully, face your shadows, and reclaim your worth. Jung said only what we truly are can heal us. And now, you no longer need heroes. You are your own hero, and that changes everything. Let this message be a constant reminder. You are not what was done to you. You are what you choose to make of it. From now on, may your life reflect your consciousness, not your trauma. Surround yourself with people who see your light, respect your boundaries, and don't need to dim you to shine. Because the psychological game narcissists can't handle is exactly this one, the one where you play with truth, presence, and authenticity. And in that game, you always win. If this message touched your heart, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Like, comment below how this content resonated with your story. And of course, subscribe to the channel to keep receiving content that awakens, strengthens, and frees your journey. This journey is just beginning, and I want to walk alongside you. Because, as Jung said, those who look outside, dream. Those who look inside, awaken. May you never close your eyes to yourself again. See you in the next video.